The Chicago Bears are massive underdogs against the Philadelphia Eagles this week, but in the NFL, anything can happen in any individual game. So we'll put together a game plan for what the Chicago Bears need to do to beat the Philadelphia Eagles on Sunday.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. On the show today, we put together a game plan for a Chicago Bears upset victory on Sunday. Easier said than done, but we at least have to say it first before we can see it done. We'll look through what this Bears offense can do to put up some points on the Eagles and keep up with what likely will be a shootout between these two teams and where there are some very real vulnerabilities on this Philadelphia defense. Then we'll look at this Bears defense and try and do the impossible, find a way to slow down this Eagles offense and fix a Bears defense that's been struggling to stop much of anybody in recent weeks. And we'll wrap up looking at the key one-on-one individual matchups that the Bears need to win in order to win this game on Sunday. When you look at just like the Philadelphia Eagles defensive roster, the starting lineup, the depth chart, however you want to do it, you got to make sure first and foremost that you're not scared by the name recognition, right? Guys like Ndamukong Suh, Brandon Graham, Fletcher Cox, Linval Joseph, Darius Slay. I mean, across the board, it's guys that are closer to, and some more than others, household names in the NFL. Guys that have been striking fear in opposing offensive coordinators' hearts for a long time. And I think it's important to keep in mind that many of those guys, not all of them, are, I would say, well past their prime. They're at least not playing like they did in their prime. That's not to say that those guys are playing poorly, but they're not. This is not peak Ndamukong Suh coming off the bench for the Eagles. It's not peak Fletcher Cox, even as a starter for the Eagles. Still very good players, but not as dominant as they once were. So first and foremost, the Bears can't let the idea of these players beat them before they let the actual players beat them. You have to just take them as generic opponent number 91, generic opponent number 90 or 95 or 74, whatever number some of these players are wearing. They're not anything bigger than what the player is that's lined up against from you. The other thing to keep in mind here is that the Eagles defensive coordinator, Jonathan Gannon, was Matt Eberflus's defensive backs coach with the Indianapolis Colts. So both defenses should know each other very well, right? Both teams should have a pretty good expectation of schematically what the opposing defense is going to provide for them. So I wouldn't expect this Eagles defense to throw much at the Bears that they're not ready for, because the Eagles don't necessarily hide it. They're a really, really good defensive line and the pass rush up front. I mean, that is the strength of this Eagles defense. They roll 8 or 9 guys in that rotation. And we talked yesterday with Louis DiBiase from Locked On Eagles about how probably all 8 or 9 of them would probably be better than all of the Chicago Bears defensive linemen. Like any of the Eagles backups would be better than any of the Bears starters. It's a really deep, strong, and aggressive group. Now, that being said, they're not a shutdown run defense in that group. They're not a bad run defense, but it's not as dominant in that area as the sack numbers and the rest of that you're seeing from this defensive line. So I think the Bears should have some ability to control the clock a little bit with David Montgomery in the ground game. The Eagles have done a pretty good job against mobile quarterbacks this season. They kept Daniel Jones from scrambling on him too much last week. Same thing with Kyler Murray earlier in the season. So we'll see exactly how much Justin Fields is able to create as a runner. I think he's better than both of those two guys we mentioned, but there should be some real opportunities there for David Montgomery to at least keep up the level that he's been up to at this point. And so then when you look at like the passing game and where the Bears can get some things going beyond that, I see a weakness in this Eagles secondary, specifically at the safety position, where they've had some injuries there and just some inconsistencies. And I'd like to see this Bears offense test those safeties when they can, because obviously the pass rush is going to be a problem there. And you need the offensive line to be able to hold up to allow receivers to get far enough downfield to where they're then matching up with those safeties that you can find more advantageous matchups, because they have some real talent at the outside cornerback spots in particular. And that's not to say the Bears can't win any of those either, but safeties is going to be where I think it's an easier matchup. And so it's all about giving Justin Fields some time to be able to get those matchups. More max protection plays with tight ends and running backs staying in the block, more moving pockets, the rollouts to get him just away from the pass rushers from the start of the snap so that they have to chase him down from across the field and not give them a more direct path to the quarterback. Run some play action in there to make sure that these pass rushers aren't just, metaphorically pinning their ears back and just going into full pass rush mode and not having to respect the run on some of those plays. And also sneaking in some screen passes behind them can slow that down. The Bears have been a screen-heavy team this season, and I would expect to see more of that in this matchup as a pass-rushing tactic, or as I guess a pass protection tactic to limit the pass rush. I'll also say the Eagles have a surprising number of missed tackles from their linebackers and safeties, so there's some opportunities here to get your playmakers the ball in space. If you can just get it past that defensive line there, you have some room to do some damage there. And with this pass rush, the Eagles have been very good at converting pass rushes into sacks. A high percentage of their pressures are sacks. And so I'm nervous about Justin Fields trying to evade sacks and pass rushers here and there that are trying to bring him down. When they're actually able to get a hand on him, they do a really good job of getting the quarterback to the ground. So I'd like to see Fields maybe throw the ball away a little bit more and just be quicker to get rid of it in general, because they know how to finish getting after the quarterback. The Bears are going to need their own pass rush to get after Jalen Hurts a little bit if they want to have any chance of slowing down this Philadelphia Eagles high-flying offense. We'll take a look at what kind of game plan could at least maybe slow them down a little bit, even if you're not going to shut them down entirely, next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Tommy John, the makers of the most comfortable undergarments on the market. Don't make your loved ones face the dead of winter in old t-shirts, ancient underwear, and ratty sweats. Help them fight the cold with Cozy. Give them the gift of Tommy Johns, because Tommy Johns make you that much more comfortable. And when you're comfortable, you're confident, you're smooth, and you're in control. And right now, Tommy Johns has their Wrap It Up sale right now that helps you give the gift of comfort to everyone on your list with Tommy Johns underwear, loungewear, and pajamas. They've sold over 18 million pairs, and the customers keep coming back. That's why they don't call them customers. They call them Tommy John's fanatics. And every gift is backed by Tommy John's best pair you'll ever wear, or it's free guarantee. So hurry up to Tommy John's Wrap It Up sale and get 30% off everything, plus free shipping at TommyJohn.com/lockedon. Order now so your gifts arrive before the holidays. 30% off, plus free shipping at TommyJohn.com/lockedon. That's TommyJohn.com/lockedon. See site for details. When I was putting together the notes for this podcast on what this Bears defense needs to do to stop this Eagles offense or slow this Eagles offense, the first words that I wrote down was just pray, because it doesn't feel like there's a real clear, obvious solution. There's not a huge weakness in this Eagles offense or some way that you can really game plan to shut down their strength. I think you can look at what they tend to do well and prepare for it, but even then, I think the big takeaway for me is that some of it's just going to come down to how these Bears players do in their one-on-ones. Particularly, I think, in the secondary. That when I look at how Jalen Hurts throws the ball, he's not as much, and it varies by game, but it's not as much of attack the middle of the field type of guy. We've seen the Eagles go more prominent towards, think like if you divide the field into thirds, more like the outer third. So it's not like the dead middle of the field, but it's not super, not just outside the numbers. So you get some of like where you might consider like the seams a little bit as well in there, but it's more like from the slot and out. So your outside cornerbacks, your slot cornerbacks, and your safeties cover the slot, or sometimes your linebackers that have to go out into the flats, they can be in that regard too. And so for the Bears, having Kyler Gordon, Kindle Vildor, and Jaquan Brisker all coming back from injury this week should be a nice boost for this defense. I still don't know if that's going to solve other problems, though, right? I mean, this is a huge test with wide receivers like A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith on the other side. Even Quez Watkins has been playing pretty well for them as well. It certainly helps the Bears that Dallas Goedert is on injured reserve. I think that's why you've seen the Eagles not attack the middle of the field as much comparatively, because they don't have really any real threat at tight end right now. I mean, it's if you could name a tight end on the Eagles roster that's not Dallas Goedert, I would be very, very impressed, because it's something called a Jack Stoll and a Grant Calcaterra and a Tyree Jackson. Just almost no passing threat from those guys at those positions. So it's all about those wide receivers. And I really feel like this is one of those games that I think it's going to be more about how Gordon and Vildor and Brisker and Johnson do one-on-one, versus Brisker and Smith, more than like a specific scheme battle. They're going to take deep shots, and whether you're in a zone or man, a lot of those deep shots end up kind of being one-on-one. It's either the safety versus the receiver, or it's the cornerback versus the receiver down the field, and there's a contested catch point, or you're a step behind, and can you disrupt the catch point just a little bit? It's those kind of things where it's just, all right, Gordon and Brisker, what kind of rust do you have on? What kind of progress have you made during your rookie season? Can you go toe-to-toe with some of the NFL's best? It's not realistic to expect either of those guys to shut down Smith or Brown or the Eagles passing game, but to me, it's more about the consistency. How often? I think A.J. Brown's probably going to get one or two of his downfield, but is it Gordon gets beat once or twice, or is it Gordon gets beat 5 or 6 times? That's the differentiator in a game like this. All of these guys in the secondaries are going to get beat sometimes. It's just, every cornerback gets beat sometimes. Jalen Ramsey gets beat sometimes. It's a matter of how often in a game like this, because the margin of error against this Eagles offense is quite small, and you have to imagine they're going to attack these young players in the Bears secondary, more than some of the other guys that might have a little bit more experience, because let's not forget about a guy like DeAndre Houston Carson starting in place of like Eddie Jackson. There's not a lot of strength you can go to and a lot of experience you can go to in this secondary. Houston Carson is the most experienced. Vildor and Johnson are both in their third years, and the other two are rookies. Like it's going to be a real test for those guys and a real measurement of like, okay, we saw Gordon get torched a lot early in the season. If he gets torched a lot again, maybe we haven't made as much progress as you thought. But if he holds down a little better, then we're getting there. We're getting there just a bit more. I think you're kind of left feeling like you can't leave these guys in man-to-man coverage too much against them. We've certainly seen Jalen Hurts have a lot of success against man coverage this season. It makes it a little bit too easy to read. I think he's also so fast as a runner that if you're in man coverage and you have your back to the quarterback, he can go out and make some plays with his legs. And I just don't feel like if you ask these cornerbacks to cover these receivers one-on-one in man all game, it just doesn't seem like it's going to go well for you. You also want to get some pass rush on Jalen Hurts, but we've just seen that this Bears defensive line is not capable of doing that consistently, especially now facing another really, really good offensive line in the Philadelphia Eagles. If you're going to blitz, I'd say, zone blitz, if anything, just because, you don't want to be sitting there with, man free on the back end, or maybe just no deep safety help. If you're blitzing 2 guys here, that scares me a little bit too much against the Eagles. So, at best you're gonna zone blitz here or there. But, with an offensive line this good and a pass rush this bad, I don't know how much of a difference it's going to make. You just need, again, somebody to step up. You're going to need some one-on-ones to win here, and I don't know that the Bears have the horses to do so. Not as worried about like Miles Sanders in the backfield. The Eagles are running the ball really well, but I think that's a lot more about the run blocking and the offensive line than it is about Sanders doing anything exceptional. He's good. He's not a bad running back. It's not a big shot on him. It's just like I think you could put a lot of running backs in that backfield and have a lot of success. The Eagles will run a good dose of play action as well, but it's worth noting their play action is not where the deep shots come from for the most part. That play action for them tends to be more like intermediate stuff, getting behind the linebackers and in front of the safeties and not just loading up for a deep bomb. So it's kind of a catch-22 there where it's like they're running the ball really well with that offensive line, so you got to be physical against the running game. They're also going to play action you a lot and take shots behind you if you step up on the running game. They're not going to take the deep bombs, but it's those intermediate balls. So it's going to take some Bears players playing better than we've seen them play this season to slow down this Eagles offense. And in return, the Bears offense is going to need to outscore them in a shootout. You're going to need to take advantage of every offensive possession with touchdowns and not field goals, and hope the Eagles have some penalties to slow them down, or a fluky turnover, or the Bears get a big special teams play to really kind of get things over the top for them. It's all about those one-on-ones, though. Excuse me. It's all about those one-on-ones, though. And we'll go through where the Bears really need to win them most consistently to win this game next on Locked On Bears. This holiday season, find what you love at Total Wine and More. With so many great bottles to choose from, it's easy to find a new favorite Cabernet or Chardonnay, or the perfect gifts for everyone on your list with help from a friendly guide. I was just at Total Wine the other day and I picked up a great French single malt whiskey that you can't find at too many liquor stores, but it's smooth, it's easy, it's delicious, and of course, it's at a great price at Total Wine. They have the lowest prices you can find. And always, love what you find only at Total Wine and More. Curbside pickup and delivery are available in most areas. Visit TotalWine.com to learn more. Drink responsibly and be 21. We've danced around some of the matchups in this game, and we talked more broadly about position groups yesterday on Locked On Bears with Louis DiBiase from Locked On Eagles on our Crossover Thursday podcast, but I want to get more specifically on individual players here and who you need to see win. And when I look at trying to get some kind of pass rush going against Jalen Hurts and the Eagles offensive line, if you have to pick a weak spot with that offensive line, I'd say the left side is weaker than the right side. You know, Jordan, I can never say his last name correctly. Jordan, my Talia, I can never. It's one of those names that's really tough. Jordan Malata, their left tackle, Jordan, number 68, I think is one of the weaker links, and same with their left guard, Landon Dickerson, compared to, Lane Johnson and Isaac Seumalo on the right side. Of course, Jason Kelsey, their center, is great. I think Lane Johnson is on the injury report this week. He was limited with an abdomen. I'm not expecting him to miss the game, but something to keep an eye on there. I think Landon Dickerson was as well. So certainly if you get a backup in there, that's right away where you got to attack. But, a guy like Trevis Gibson rushing versus Jordan Mailata on the left side. We're going to go with that. Gibson's got to step up at some point here, right? Like it's still a good matchup. He's not a bad left tackle. We're just talking about what's the weaker link of the two. It's still a very high bar, but show us that next step. Show us that next gear. Make a big play when your team needs it. Go and win that one-on-one. Get some pass rush on Jalen Hurts. Get him uncomfortable and make him have to get out of that pocket a little bit and maybe extend those plays and let things break down a little bit on the back end. Just give your guys some sort of help up front from a guy like Gibson stepping up. It's what it's going to take to win a game like this. I also think it's going to be a really huge test for a guy like Jalen Johnson. We talked about Brisker and Gordon and Vildor coming back, but Johnson's been there, and he's the number one cornerback. He wants to be the shutdown guy. Match up with A.J. Brown. He's one of the best receivers in the NFL. Shut him down. I don't think it's realistic to expect him to, fully shut him down and not allow him anything, but I think he's number 5 among wide receivers in receiving yards this season, and he's right near the top in yards per reception as well. I mean, he's producing with the best of them. Slow him down. Can you hold him to under 50 yards and under 5 catches? That kind of thing. Can we see Jalen Johnson have a little bit of that, everyone take notice type of game because I'm here to slow this guy down? I think A.J. Brown has only had 2 games, 3 games under 50 yards this season. Can Jalen Johnson be one of them? Certainly you can't afford to give him another one of these 150-yard games he's had this season, but, do they let Jalen Johnson shadow Brown all over the field? Devonta Smith is very good and is a very real threat that you can't just ignore and focus on A.J. Brown the whole time. But I think Brown is still a real step above there. So do you have Jalen Johnson shadow him around and see how that goes across the field, or do you leave him on the sides? I mean, it's something I would definitely strongly consider given the proclivity of A.J. Brown to make big plays downfield. Let's see how Jalen Johnson does. If he can shut him down a bit more and limit the Eagles' offense in that way, it gives this Bears defense much more of a fighting chance, and maybe gives the pass rush a little bit more time to get home as well. On the flip side, we talked about the Eagles' safeties being a weakness. All right, Cole Kmet, let's step up. Cole Kmet versus the likes of Marcus Epps, or I think Kevon Wallace may start at safety this week because their other safety, Reed Blankenship, is working through injury. It's still to be determined exactly who's going to start there. But regardless, you may not have heard of any of those 3 safeties, right? Like, that's not the best way to measure if a player is good or not, but it is an illustration of their lack of proven high-end talent at that position. And so if you can get Cole Kmet matched up one-on-one with those guys, that's a spot you need your tight end to go up and win those balls. The linebackers for Philadelphia are pretty good too. I think there's an opportunity there, but I think they've been playing pretty well. But more so the safeties, I think, where Cole Kmet needs to win it, make a big play or two for your offense when they really need it, especially down in the red zone. Or I also look in the passing game. The Eagles' outside cornerbacks are really, I think, the strength. Their slot cornerback's not bad, but kind of like we talked about with the offensive line. The weaker of an otherwise good group, Avonte Maddox, their slot cornerback, versus the Bears' option in the slot right now is Dante Pettis. That's who they've been going to as their primary slot receiver over the last couple of games since Darnell Mooney has been out. I wrote in my notes, I said Avonte Maddox versus Dante Pettis, parentheses, ew. So then I also wrote, or other better slot option, which I don't know that the Bears exactly have other guys with a really great slot skill set. Certainly Claypool and Pringle and Harry and Jones will occasionally line up there. But, Pettis has been kind of their go-to slot guy. We've seen him occasionally make a flash play here or there, a couple of big touchdowns this season that kind of come out of nowhere, and then he disappears for weeks on end. This is the week when you could really use one of those random, great Dante Pettis plays in a matchup that might be a little bit more favorable than what you're getting on the outside against Bradbury and Darius Slay. It's worth noting that Chase Claypool has missed 2 days of practice now with the knee injury, presumably the knee injury he suffered in the last game, but he came back in that game and finished that game and then also had the whole bye week off. So I'm a little bit concerned and confused as to why the knee injury is still limiting and actually keeping Chase Claypool out of practice and maybe ultimately out of this game. I mean, it's going to be a real rough wide receiver core with no Mooney and no Claypool if that ends up being the case. So you're going to need Byron Pringle to step up. You're going to need N'Keal Harry to step up. You're going to need Velus Jones to maybe get a bigger role, more time with the ball in his hands, and just make a play. Because like I said, each of these linebackers and safeties have all missed over 10 tackles this season. And a lot of this Eagles defense, they're missing tackles on over 10% of their tackle attempts. It's not a huge percentage, relatively speaking, but like compared to other teams, it's a slightly surprisingly high rate of missed tackles. So, can Velus Jones make someone miss and break off a big play? Can Byron Pringle make the first guy miss after the catch and get a big play? Or David Montgomery? Treston Ebner, can we see that speed break away from someone and have his coming into the NFL game, right? Somebody somewhere is going to need to step up and make a play when the Eagles maybe aren't expecting them to. That's what it's going to take to win this game in an upset. And it's not something you can perfectly draw up in a game plan or in a scheme, but we try our best here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So I hope you'll hit that subscribe button to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. If you're looking for your second listen, the Locked On Podcast Network is your team every day, and that includes most of your Chicago sports teams as well. Locked On Bulls, Locked On Blackhawks, Locked On Cubs, Locked On White Sox, plus Locked On College Sports, Northwestern and Fighting Illini we have for sure. So go check out some of our other Locked On Chicago shows. for your second listen. Come on back on Monday as we'll recap Bears-Eagles on Locked On Bears. Make that your first listen on Monday. And of course, you have to come back for your next opportunity to bear down.